Hi, all. I am recording today on Monday, January 18th. I have to look at the date. It is MLK Day, and it is the first day of our last module where we are tasked with thinking about educational quality. I want to acknowledge this moment, right? So, Wednesday is the upcoming inauguration of President elect Biden, Vice President elect Kamala Harris. A week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, we had the storming of the Capitol. Today is MLK Day, which I already said, but so I'm sure we're all experiencing a flurry of comments about King and love and the content of people's characters, sentiments that, while sentiments that he said, in many ways whitewash the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. And as I was rereading this week's pieces, I thought it was fitting that one of the first was from Grace Lee Boggs, who is an Asian American activist from Michigan who worked on freedom schools and freedom movements in Detroit in the tradition of King. And Boggs, like King, had a deep critique of the inequality of our society, both racial and economic. And it's that critique that I really want us to sit with at the end of this course. So we have been considering concepts in the positive in terms of what does freedom look like? What does democracy look like? What does care look like? But I think that what Boggs and King and Fraser from week 5 call on us to recognize is that often we cannot identify what this looks like philosophically or practically. But what we can do is we can identify where we're not experiencing it, right? So Nancy Fraser talked about identifying justice in the negative, that we can identify injustice. We feel it in our bones when something is unjust. And while it is the work of philosophers and politicians to identify the criteria that are unjust, we don't need those criteria to know and to recognize when something is fundamentally unjust. Why? Because typically something that's unjust takes away someone's humanity. There is a great podcast that Brene Brown just put out on dehumanization and the role that it plays in perpetuating injustice, that it's the way that we justify it to ourselves, is we take away someone's humanity. So we dehumanize, we deny someone's dignity, and when we deny their dignity and we dehumanize them, we deny their humanity, we take away all the nuanced, complicated, constituent parts of who they are. I mean, we don't actually take them away, right? Because those are inherent to who we are as human beings. But when we look at the other, we don't see those parts. And I bring that up because as we think about quality in education, I want us to dwell in its opposite, right? Whether you think about its opposite as inequality, whether you think about its opposite as bad education, I want us to think about how we know when we're witnessing education that is not high quality. And I think that Lee Patel, in her reading for this week, which I don't have the title written down, but on learning as resistance and survivance, that she portrays very well this negation, right? Through describing what schooling is. And what schooling is not quality education. Schooling, as we have been reading about all through this course, the way that it is set up, the way that it is designed, is to dehumanize. And the analysis that Boggs brings forward, and I think that she writes so accessibly, so beautifully, right? Because she's an activist, she's not an academic per se. Boggs, in our readings this week, brings forth this critique that, of course, education as it exists is dehumanizing, is unjust, is not a quality education because it doesn't serve humans, it serves profit. This is a critique echoed by King about our society at large, right? I will get the quote wrong, but there is a great quote from one of King's speeches where he talked about capitalism, that the story that we tell about capitalism is that it's built from the Protestant work ethic, but really capitalism is a system of exploitation built on the backs of Black folks. And he takes that profit, right? That idea of it is about economic profit. It's not about hard work and dignity. That's not what capitalism's base is. Capitalism's base in the United States is about exploiting the labor of others for the profit of some. And schools are, by design, a part of this process. How do we make students and their lives profitable? And not profitable for the student themselves, but for whoever is profiting off of them. We see in the US today growing economic inequality. I believe that this is again, I'll get the statistics wrong. I don't have lecture notes in front of me, but that this is the first generation whose economic prospects will actually be less than their parents' generation. We see a widening gap between upper and middle class, where the wealthiest Americans, the wealthiest citizens of the globe, contain more and more of the resources and profit, right? And it's harder and harder to enter and stay in the middle class. We see educational costs rising with no relief in sight. We see cost of living across other sectors rising with no relief in sight. And we see stagnant wages that aren't even keeping up with inflation. And the cost of things are rising faster than inflation. So we have this great mismatch. So when we talk about, and I forget the term that Brighouse uses, but I think it's contributory effectiveness, your ability to go out and support yourself and be financially viable as a human being. Yes, that's part of what schools are trying to equip us for. And at the same time, they're designed to make us, what makes us economically viable is being able to slip into the system of profit. And there is historical, this isn't a history class, so we haven't gone through how schools were structured on factory models, concern for workers, but we've seen pieces of that throughout these philosophical arguments. And Grace Lee Boggs really hits it home. And when we are not partaking in that profit of our humanity, of course students resist. Of course students step back. Of course students drop out. Of course students are angry, right? For those of us who have worked or will work in classrooms, we know what student resistance looks like. It looks like disengagement. It looks like anger. It looks like disinvolvement. It looks like distraction. It looks like anything but doing what the teacher is trying to accomplish. And that sentence is intentional because the teacher is at the center of it. And the other thing, one of the ideas that comes across in this week about quality is too often, I think it's Thayer Bacon, maybe it was Nussbaum, that talked about too often when we're talking about education, we're talking about the adults and not about the young people who are actually experiencing it. So as you're looking at this week's readings on quality, I want you to really think in your mind about like a T-chart, right? And on one side is, what is a bad education? And we have ample examples. Name them, right? However banal they may seem, however obvious, name them. Because when we name them, we can begin to think about, so what else could it look like? And I think each of the pieces this week offers us an idea of what else could it look like. And each of them is imperfect and incomplete. And part of the reason that I include the Lee and Hawkins piece, which is not philosophical, it is qualitative empirical research, is because they offer a tentative idea, and they're able to sit with this idea that in this educational space, these community-based after-school programs, here are things that are happening that are positive, that are amazing. Family is here. I can be my whole self as an immigrant, as a Hmong American student. And they acknowledge also these learning activities that they're engaging students in are not that great. And that we can look at both of those and still say that this is a space of nourishment for the youth that go to the community-based center. So as you're thinking about quality this week, I want you to think about both. Where are we experiencing education that is not high quality? And then how does that open up pathways to imagine what a high quality education can be? And again, think of that rooted in the way that Nancy Fraser talked about justice, that we can identify injustice, and that actually is the constituent first step. Being able to identify injustice, being able to identify when dehumanization is happening, when we are stripped of our dignity, when we are denied self-determination, because then when we identify what the negative is, we can start imagining then what justice looks and feels like. And I just want to say briefly, I did not record a video last week. Part of me intended to, and then I finished rewatching the Gloria Ladson-Billings article, and I thought that she said everything I could say about justice better than I can. And so in a way, her video stands as the instructor comments for last week. And for thinking about justice, just justice, right? Without qualifiers. Because if we take away those qualifiers, what does it get us thinking about? Dignity, humanity, full participation, self-determination. So these are some rambling thoughts for our final week. I look forward to seeing what you have to say in your discussions and enjoying this last week together in our online space.